Well, here's some stuff you may find contrary to your expectations or what you think you understand. Let's start off with a brief comment. The Federal Reserve banks are not a part of the federal government. If you take out a dollar bill at the top, it will say Federal Reserve. That is a private corporation. Notice the Federal Reserve banks are set up like private corporations. They are private corporations. The Federal Reserve is not a bank. It has no reserves. The name Federal Reserve was created by a group of people who are sons of the Rothschilds through Interbank and the Bank of England and other central banks. They call themselves banks. They are private for-profit corporations that get their government to legislate them a monopoly on issuing the currency of that country. And they do not have any reserves. They print up credits to a government and they extend those credits into the banking system, and then they charge the government interest on money that they didn't have. And member of the interbank, I'll just call these people the interbank group because whether it's a Deutsche Bank or the four major central quote banks, they're private corporations for profit, and one of them made the statement that they don't care what nationality they're in. They don't care your government political point of view. They don't care about your population, your economics, your religion. The only thing they care about is to establish one of their branches in your country, call it, and they will name it the Central Bank or Federal Reserve, and they are legislated a monopoly to print the money and charge interest on loaning out that money that they don't have. They never did. They have no intention of doing it. And then they make money by getting paid interest on the fictitious, basically, fiat currency that they printed up. And that's the only thing that they care about. That's it. That's their statement. The Federal Reserve was so named according to their own discussion that it would not contain the word bank. It would be apparent that it was something of and by the government, which it is not. That it would say reserve as though it had something of substance. These private for-profit branches of the interbank group of people, families, and what? The first thing they do when they get this legislation passed, and they will do anything to get the legislation passed, they will create all kinds of problems for the government and the people to create. It looks like you've got to give them a monopoly in order to stabilize the current currency. And actually the opposite is true once they get a hold of the situation and get this legal monopoly. It's the opposite. And the first thing they do, their main aim, is to extract all the wealth out of the government itself. And for instance, the United States, at one time, the call went out for all the gold in the United States, and so people sent the gold in and it went to Fort Knox. Well, guess what happened? The Federal Reserve Corporation, that gold is now back in Europe. The Federal Reserve doesn't have any use for it. They don't need it. They have a monopoly. They can, when the U.S. government wants funds, they just issue it and then they charge them interest on money that they didn't have, on the money that the Federal Reserve doesn't have. The corporation has no assets other than a printing press, electronic printing press. Now, after they had extracted the money out of the government, and notice the U.S. government no longer has any funds at all. It's broke. It is flat out broke now. It has all the wealth out of that the government actually had is gone because of the Federal Reserve Corporation. As is pointed out, the Federal Reserve Corporation is not listed in the government section of the telephone books or our listings. It is in the private yellow pages business listings, because that is what it is. The next thing these interbank people do is they go after the money that is in the citizens' pockets. So they are out now to fleece the citizens after they've extracted the money out of the government. And I'm sure you think that the stock market in 1929 had a crash. Well, one of the things that when the interbank or anybody has control of the interest rates, they can expand and contract the money supply at will, because the government has no say. The government of the United States or any government in the world has no say over what the private corporation can charge for interest rates. If Boeing wants to increase their prices, the president can't say, "You can't do that. I'm going to fire you." You see. Volcker was a shill of the interbank people. And the expansion of the money supply, because the Federal Reserve can raise or lower the interest rate at will, they expand the money supply, the economy heats up, people start borrowing money, the stock market rises as it did in 29, people are borrowing money as interest rates are cheap, up and 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 up, And then, of course, the interbank knows what's going to happen, because they are going to, pull the trap door. And in one situation, I believe it was the 1800s, they actually told their member banks that they were associated with in the United States that on a certain date, 3 years hence, they were to discontinue renewing loans. And of course, they raised the interest rates, and there was a contraction of the money supply, and there was severe problems, and of course there were a lot of bankruptcies, and of course Interbank, they had made so much money they just went up buying up all these bankrupt properties. Well, that's just the way they create a business cycle. Now, in 29, everybody and their mother's uncle was taking money out of here, borrowing money there, because the stock market was going up and up and up and up, and interest rates were down and down and down and down. Well, isn't it interesting to note that J.P. Morgan and a couple of his buddies, they would later say, "Whew, boy, we got out just in time before the crash." Well, if you look into J.P. Morgan, he was a henchman of the interbank folks. And of course, he knew exactly when and where the margin call was going to happen. Of course, ostensibly to the public, it looked like things were out of control and it was a good idea maybe to have margin calls. But look what happened. Shares, interbank was shorting the heck out of the market. They sent out the margin calls. The market crashed, of course. The severe contraction of the money supply, and they bought back those shares literally for pennies. But they didn't stop there. They didn't stop because there was still wealth left around the country. And they continued to contract the money supply such that farms and businesses and everybody was going bankrupt. And they had made so much money in the stock market crash that, of course, they bought up, 50% or more of the bankrupt farmers in the country. And if you notice that the value of the US dollar went up during the Depression, as that's what happens in the Depression. If you have a hyperinflation, it goes down. If depression is coming up, you want to have dollars and gold because the value of the dollars is going to go up. If you're going into a hyperinflation, you have debt because you can pay it off. And the value of your debt, the nominal value, the face value, becomes insignificant, as happened in German runaway inflation. Everybody paid off their mortgages, in a week, essentially at some point. And so this is typical of what the interbank can do simply with a telephone call. Well, the same thing happened in 2008 with the real estate bubble and crash. Interbank people through Federal Reserve lowered those interest rates down to almost nothing. People were buying properties right and left, for no money down, nobody. And all of a sudden somebody said, hey, this isn't cool, Stop renewing the loans. So people had to dump their houses for losses, and there was a crash. And of course, the interbank folks went around the country buying up properties for pennies on the dollar again. This is just typical. It's just typical. This is their MO. Well, look at the present, Look at the present. If you look at the stock market, it's up around 25,000 or so now. And you have people like Warren Buffett saying, it's a good buy. Things look like they're a good buy. If you know anything about making money, you buy low and you sell high. You have an exit strategy. There's an exit point. We look at where the stock market is. Don't you think that's an exit point? Why would Warren Buffett be saying now is a good time to get into stocks? I saw him for an hour presentation here, and I'm going, he sounds just like J.P. Morgan on the eve of the crash. Out there buying stocks. Does Warren Buffett know something he's not telling us? Anybody and their mother's uncle knows that 25,000 for the stock market, U.S. stock market right now, that's an exit point. It's time to get the heck out of the U.S. dollar. Period. Today is September 7th, 2019. What is the interbank folks going to use as a trigger mechanism to fleece the American public? Just today, the chairman was talking about reducing the interest rate. Well, isn't that cute? Well, that's going to increase the money supply, isn't it? That's going to make, help things along. The stock market is going to look more attractive. And of course, Trump, what's he doing? He's not helping the country. He says he was going to, but now look what he's doing. And even Republican businessmen are going to him and say, what are you doing? Well, Trump, now see, what is Trump doing? Why is America being used to confront China? You see, Trump has created a trade war, and leaders have always created wars for public support. And now he's coming up for re-election. This trade war is in the news, and as election time approaches, we're going to see that these trade talks, he's going to say that he's getting concessions from China. He's working things out. Things are going to be positive, and then interest rates are going to be going down, and people are going to be feeling good about the economy, like you are, probably. But the interbank folks are increasing the money supply, lowering the interest rate, and they're getting ready to spring the trap. 25,000 isn't quite high enough. It's not quite in the public favor publicly yet. So, why this trouble with China? Well, interbank people, they don't care about China. What they care about is that the Chinese save 45% of their GDP. And President Xi said they're going to start retroactively funding the retirement for all their millions and billions of citizens into the stock market. I mean, the government there has huge wealth like the interbank people haven't seen in their entire existence of 400 or 500 years. Why do you think the Swiss franc has been stable? It's a fiat currency. Every other fiat currency has entered in hyperinflation, and everybody knows that. Why the Swiss franc being the fiat currency hasn't happened to the Swiss? Because the interbank people come from Switzerland. That's where they've got their wealth. Are you going to ruin your own currency? No. So that's why you want a stable place to put it in. I mean, the Swiss, currency is, it's being protected. But anyway, so looking at China with this tremendous amount of wealth, I mean, the interbank is just salivating. And then the Chinese individuals save around 35% of their monthly income. And they're looking at the stock market. So the interbank folk really want to get one of their corporate offices installed as the, quote, central bank of China. Of course, convincing President Xi and the Communist Central Party, is kind of a tough sell, given what they can see that the interbank folks have done around the world with the IMF and all their shenanigans, putting their, quote, central banks in to stabilize countries, and then ripping off the government and fleecing the people, like Zimbabwe, Argentina, Venezuela, and now the United States is coming up with just one thing after another. It's just all in a day's work. And every one of those countries, you look into what happened, it's all the same people, caused it, the same thing happened. Take the wealth out of the government, then fleece the people. Take the wealth out of it, and then fleece the people. And it's just, it's the interbank people are, through Trump, are trying to create a such trouble for the Chinese government that they will allow the interbank to put in get them to the Chinese government to give them the exclusive right to print the RMB, the yuan, whatever you want to call it, and to charge the interest rate, and then the interbank folks can extract that wealth out of the government, and then they can fleece the citizens. And that's the only thing that the interbank people care about. That is the only thing, and they have stated it. It's a private corporation around the world. period. They look like they're a central bank. And even in the United States, President Trump will say he's talking to the feds. What? What do you mean, talking to the feds? The FDA? That's a fed. The EPA? That's a fed. The Federal Reserve? Sounds like it, but it ain't. They're creating business cycles in the United States, and they're creating bubbles and taking the money off the top, and it goes down. They're taking the money out of the bottom, put the money back in, take it out of the top, and they're going up and down, and you think it's a business cycle. That's what you're led to believe. And you've been led to believe that the Federal Reserve, it's on the banknote, take out a dollar bill. It said Federal Reserve. And it all looks like it was printed by the U.S. government. It's just marketing. Isn't that what you do if you were trying to create a scam like the Federal Reserve Corporation is doing and foist it on the American public? The Federal Reserve's got no reserves. And they're not federal. I mean, it could have been a private corporation started by GM. It'd be the same deal. Clever name. Clever publicity. The chairman Volcker appears before the Senate, says, "Hey, you know, we should really have a bazooka here. We don't need to use it, but just if we have it, then people won't push. We can get the confidence that we have this and we're not going to use it." Well, guess what? 2 months later, he says, "Well, geez, we had to use the bazooka." Yeah, it's just, it's too bad. Of course, you look at the amount of money that the Federal Reserve made out of using the bazooka. Well, if you didn't see that coming, of course you didn't. Now, President Jackson, he knew what these people were all about. He knew what these people were all about. He fought them and he got them silenced for some decades. But they came back. They will come back. As he called them, pernicious weeds, vipers. And that's what they don't care about anything but extracting the wealth out of a country. And all they need is the monopoly to print the currency and to charge interest for it that they print. Boy, if that's not a scam. Yet, the American public and people around the world believe it. You get economists acting as though there's as though the labor statistics drive interest rates up and down or something. It's just Goebbels had nothing over these people at all. They've been defrauding people around the world with their cleverness. So, back to the United States here, I mean, when are they going to trigger and reap and fleece the American public? What is going to be the ostensible reason? Well, given they are reducing the interest rate because of the economy in response to the problems with the trade war, it sounds all reasonable. But Trump is he's going to be resolving the stock market is going to go up and the interest rate's going down and things are going to look rosy on a good path, and they're just getting ready to spring the trap door. So get out anything that is denominated in the U.S. dollar, get out of it. That's what I tell myself anyway. And my friends, I say, look, and I'm not going to give you advice. I'm just going to state the obvious, that the interbank people are creating a circumstance where they're going to fleece. They've done it to the U.S. government. It's now broke because of them, and they're going to fleece the American public. It's coming up. If Trump doesn't win, this could be used as a signal that, geez, the Democrats are in power, and so we're going to have to increase the, things have gotten too hot. Now we're going to have to increase the interest rates, and of course the contraction of the money supply is going to bring down the stock market and the economy, blah, 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 blah. The government is going to have to borrow money, and it's going to be more money, and they're going to go into hyperinflation like happened in Zimbabwe, Argentina, and Venezuela. If you know anything about what's happening in Venezuela, the same, except worse, is going to happen in the United States. It virtually guts the country. Nobody, not any citizen, has anything left to buy food, medicine, personal safety, jobs. The entire economy will be gutted. Now, the interbank still would like to get their hands on a legislative concession out of President Xi and Chinese government to set up shop there. And the interbank people will stop at nothing to do this. Literally nothing. If millions get killed and starved, they don't care. They haven't cared in the past. They're not going to care in the future. So the question is, what's the timing of this fleecing? Why wait? Why wait for them to set things up? It's coming fairly soon now. But Interbank obviously would like to get more people into the stock market. Get their savings out, put it into the stock market, get the prices up. Interbank can then short things and contract the money supply under some guise of some problem, and they're going to sell it short, and things are going to come crashing down. I wouldn't think depression is in order. Hyperinflation is. I think Zimbabwe, Argentina, Venezuela, same people, the same people, the same methodology, the same sequence, the same timing, the same results. Cryptocurrency is an international, it does not belong to a government. Yes, the price can be manipulated, but so can any exchange rate. The interbank people, last figure, had 2/3 of the entire world's gold supply. And you think gold is safe from manipulation? You think the commodities like oil, wheat, and bonds, stock market, forex exchanges are exempt from the massive financial power of the interbank people? Why is it the major commodity houses are housed in Switzerland? What kind of information can you get out of those people? Very little. You can get very little about the Rothschilds and their sons. Try getting information out of the United States Federal Reserve Corporation about who the founding members are. Not talking about the board. Why the secrecy? Why? All around the world. The Bank of England. The bank, doesn't that sound official? The bank, something you could trust. Try to find out who the founding members were then. See what they did when they got the right to print the currency and charge interest rate on money that they loaned that they didn't have. I mean, these guys, Oh, good Lord. It's not that they're clever, because they are in some ways, but people are awful dumb. What? People are often so uninformed. And of course, the interbank folks have their figureheads there. They own all kinds of media. They have all kinds of trusted spokesmen, like J.P. Morgan was. How he, helped the U.S. government out. And Warren Buffett, look at this guy. Geez, how many people have followed him? And now look what he's saying. It's a good time to get into stocks. What are you, nuts? What are you, nuts? 25,000 U.S. stock, and I don't care if it goes up to 30. It's an exit point. It's obviously an exit point. The economy's good? Yeah, is it? What is he talking about? I mean, where does he live? What is it? Was the interview conducted in Germany or something? It looked like it was in America. The Federal Reserve banks are set up like American corporations. The Federal Reserve is a private corporation. This is the kind of obfuscation that's going on. It says, are not a part of the federal government. They exist because of an act of Congress. They were forced, their arm twisted, but Congress to give them the right. Their purpose is to serve the public? Are you kidding me? They are a for-profit private corporation. Is they private or public? The Board of Government is an independent government agency? It is not. It is not. It is not. The Board of Government is like the Board of Directors of Boeing. The federal are set up like? No, it is a private corporation. See? Where did this come from? Out of Wikipedia. How did it get into Wikipedia? How did this obfuscation get into Wikipedia? Look at this double talk. Try and figure out what's going on here, really. What does it actually mean? Is it public? Is it private? Is it independent? Is it not? Is it like a corporation and therefore it is not a private corporation and it is really a public corporation? Not a part of the federal government, but they exist by an act of Congress. No, they don't exist by an act of Congress. An act of Congress gave the Federal Reserve Corporation the right monopoly to print money and charge interest, as they gave them electronic credits so they could regulate the Federal Reserve could regulate interest rates. That was the act of Congress, not the existence of the Federal Reserve Corporation. The Federal Reserve Corporation, and I think it's called giving it a charter, and they in a sense, what is the essence of the charter? Essentially, to the right monopoly to print and charge interest on the money they've printed and to regulate the interest rates. You see a lot of people see how people get lost in this. People get lost. What is going on, really? People are saying this and people are saying that. Well, what's really going on? Well, the Federal Reserve is responsible for taking the gold out of the U.S. government, for creating one boom and bust cycle by their own admission, and they're getting ready to do it again. What more do you need? When President Nixon signed the fiat currency and set the road on the U.S. government to destruction here, you think it was his idea? Sitting in the afternoon in 1971 saying, gee, you know what America really needs is a fiat currency. No, actually, it was Conley. Now, who and what was Conley's relationship to Interbank? And you see what happened in the video where I mentioned value, and you can read that on my YouTube channel here. Listen to it on value, hyperinflation, part 1, value, where people say, look at the dollar, and now it only buys 20% of what it used to. It's just the value has just evaporated. No, it did not evaporate. The purchasing power of that particular dollar bill you're holding may only be 20% of what it was when it was created, but that 80% of value has not disappeared. It's gone into the siphon that was set up, the secret tax, the silent tax. It went into the corporations expended by the U.S. government, etc., into the corporations that are owned by who else? In other words, that 80% that evaporated, well, it turns out that some people know that there's a little thing called a condenser, and it can extract out of the electronic ether into money that drips out someplace else. And a lot of people go, like third graders, oh, look at that. There was water there, a full glass yesterday, and this week there's only half of it. Isn't that magic? It's just gone. And the American public and the press are saying that. But value is different than purchasing power. A dollar bill has 100% of its value at the time it is printed. That day, that instant that it is printed, it has 100% of its purchasing power. A dollar bill that was printed a year before does not have its 100% purchasing power anymore. But the dollar bill that was printed today has 100% of its purchasing power. But in a year, its purchasing power will be diminished by however many, 50% or whatever that is. So each dollar bill, depending on when it was created, has an evaporation effect of the diminution of its particular purchasing power. But the full 100% of the value still is in existence. It's just 80% of that value has been siphoned off by the secret or silent tax. So the interbank people can create this siphon. You have no control over it. You can put your money under a mattress and it'll look like the same stack of $100 bills in 10 years, but the value will have been siphoned off and you have no control over it. And that's the concept of value rather than purchasing power. These people think about value. How to get the value. Hopefully, this will be taught in Harvard University and other universities around the world so economists will have their head on straight and they'll stop looking at the smoke screen of purchasing power and inflation. What a bunch of garbage. The interbank people raise the interest rate for one reason and lower it for another because they want to partake in a quote business cycle. And it's the government's fault. Oh, it's industry's fault. Oh, it's somebody's fault. It certainly has nothing to do with the feds. They're serving the country. They're just following labor statistics. Well, that's putting the cart before the horse. They are doing what they want with the interest rate when they want in order to make money because that is their business. They are a for-profit business. The Federal Reserve is a corporate name. And it's such a highly recognizable, iconic thing, just like Coca-Cola around the world. They think, hey, the Federal Reserve of the United States, we can trust them. Yeah, right. So, well, that's the skinny on the situation today. And, you know, as I said, you can make use of this in many ways. It can be used in many ways. I can't give a recommendation for anybody's particular situation, but, you know, take for instance a look at China and India, and Asia, where the Belt and Road, massive investment by the Chinese government to assist all these countries, and particularly India. I mean, um, you know, I'm looking at, the stocks of the future here: artificial intelligence, virtual reality, the Internet of Things, electric vehicles, autonomous vehicles, smart cities, the new microchip that has just been patented, that is going to wipe out all the microchips that are right now. It's invented in China, the patents in China. The growth of this particular area of the robots, particularly, I mean, America knows, all they can do is think of fear. But in other parts of the country, robots are a big deal. The Internet of Things is going to be massive with artificial intelligence, AV, AR, VR. I mean, it's just that's just a breeding ground for creation of wealth, of development, of new products for the world that's going to come out of Asia in these particular areas. It was like Silicon Valley when Apple and IBM and Intel and Microsoft, at the beginning back then. I guess some guy sold in 1973, sold $2,100 of his Apple stock, and if he'd held on to it, it'd be worth $70 billion today. Yeah, that was in the news. And so you can imagine what's possible, today, because the Chinese stock market, when it's going to be funded by the Chinese government to retroactively fund the pension funds of the aging population and the wealth in the Chinese people to invest in what's going to come into the Chinese market there, and the softness of the RMB now. I mean, it just seems like such an opportune time. And given where the U.S. stock market is now, where it's clearly, as far as I'm concerned, is an exit point if there ever was one, and given that the U.S. now is in getting ready to be targeted by the interbank to be fleeced for the American citizen down to every individual, it seems like if I were, looking for growth, in a long term, it seems like Asia and some of those areas that technologically, particularly the green efforts on the part of China and funding what China's government is funding and for green innovations, particularly interesting. It just seems like, but if you want if I were to go for some secure, kind of conservative protection, defensive kind of situation, then I think that the Swiss franc I would look towards, because they don't rely so heavily on imports to the United States. Apparently, maybe 2/3 of their trade is with Europe. Of course, the whole country, when the U.S. goes down and the U.S. population can't buy and import anything, this is going to be like the fall of Rome, literally. And the torch of civilization is going to go from the west to the east, literally going to get passed within the decade, because people rely so heavily on trade with the United States. Of course, Trump is kind of helping things out because with all his terrorists around all the bloody countries all around the world. All the other countries around the world are establishing independent trade relationships with each other, and they're bypassing the United States. So it's clear, why is Trump doing what he's doing? He's clearly not benefiting economically the United States. Clearly not. So then, who and why is he doing what he's doing? Well, I guess that does it. I think that kind of lays out things for my comments for the near future. Again, I'm not going to make recommendations to you because I don't know you specifically, but these are general comments and observations about the politics and the efforts behind the interbank folks, the Deutsche Bank and Bank of England, and the consortium of sons and relatives of the Rothschilds, and why they set themselves up in Switzerland, because it was at the time they did that. Of course, they had gold; they didn't have computers, and they had to have a stronghold, literally a physical stronghold, for the amount of wealth that they had. Because at that time, to have wealth, you had to either have land or you had to sack Rome or get gold. And where are you going to put it? Where can you defend it? Well, Switzerland has a natural. I mean, even Hitler, was having second thoughts. It's just a horrible place to attack. And then you see what the Swiss franc has been just plunking along since the mid-1700s. War, pestilence, inflation. Why? Well, because the people who are in control of the prince and princesses and the kingdoms and around the world, in Western world anyway, well, they like to keep their currency safe over there. They like their gold safe, as anybody would, and they have the power to do it. So, pay attention. Anyway, it would be nice if something could happen that hopefully that you'll be able to make adjustments and preparations and stay out of the worst of this.